Anybody who's been following this channel knows that we believe that the financial crisis of 2007, 8, and 9 is not over yet, and we're still dealing with it. And we see that with the hold to maturity portfolios, $400 billion. And we still see our banks, the same ones that we said 15 years ago are issues, okay? So the big three that we said 3 years ago were Credit Suisse, BNP, and Deutsche Bank. As we know, Credit Suisse is gone, and now Deutsche Bank is back in the news, but it's positive news. Now, Sewing has been the CEO of Deutsche since the financial crisis. Okay, well, I think it's the last 13 years, something like that. Okay, and they're getting ready to retire, and they have a new guy coming in, and they're talking about how well the bank is doing now. Now, the CFO for Sewing was this Mulkey guy, and he's been there since 2017, but his successor, Akram, is going to execute it. And they laid out the bank's path to 2025 delivery, and they're looking at forward-looking financials. And Sewing will bridge the two between Mulkey and Akram, okay? So they had a sweeping overhaul, and in their biggest in decades, in 2019, creating a capital release unit. Remember those words, okay? Remember something about any kind of public statement made by a bank, every single word is considered before they write it down. So creating a capital release unit, in effect, a bad bank, and to wind it down with 288 billion euros of unwanted assets. And that's around $335 billion, okay? And then they're going to cut costs and so forth and so on. And they set a new profitability target at 12 to 13% and cut their costs below 60 cents. It's 65 cents, but they're still below their peers, European peers, BBVA or UniCredit, which have a tangible equity of 20% or more. Remember the term tangible equity. We talked about this many times before. And as this gentleman here says, yes, the flow of scandals has eased off, but you're never completely sure. With Deutsche Bank, I've been burned before. I think this is basically generally the feeling of investors in the banking industry across the world. There's some banks you can trust, and there's some banks that they just always fail to deliver. Now, here's the performance of Deutsche Bank over the last 5 years. And you can see they're basically at an all-time high. And so you would say Sewing's doing a good job. And of course, he's getting ready to leave, but he's done a good job. Now, the only thing I want you to look at here on this chart is, yes, you can see since July, this thing's had a big move up from, let's say, $25 to 36. But you can look down there, I would say down in from 24 over to 25. It was really between $15 and $18. Remember that. Now, here's the key stats on Deutsche Bank. And the only one we care about is this market cap at the top right hand, $69.475 billion. Okay. And what is that? This is tangible equity. This is the number of shares outstanding, multiply it times the price, and you come up with the market cap. Tangible equity. Why is tangible equity important? It's the only thing that we're allowed to write losses off against. Okay? So 69. But we just saw that this thing was really most of the time between $15 and $20. So let's give it 18. Let's give it half. So that means that that market cap number for most of the time, not all the time, average out, was around $34, $35 billion. Okay? So how did Deutsche Bank make this bad bank? Well, they don't give you any comprehensive breakdown of the specific assets. They don't tell you how much they've sold since 2019. They just say they have been reduced. That we basically, all we know is they started a bad bank, and they put $335 billion in it. And not dollars, they put in different assets. And you can see legacy non-core loans. Non-core loans means they're down in price. If they were up in price, they'd be core loans. Corporate credit exposure, especially in commercial real estate. Now think about this. They put that in there in 2019. Is there any human being on this planet that believes that commercial real estate is better today than it was back in 2019? Yeah, I didn't think so. Then they put in non-performing loans and impaired credit asset and a liquid and distressed security such as part of restructuring or disposition programs. And of course, any litigation and legacy contingency liabilities gradually resolve. Now, look, you can stop and read this is how you form a bad bank. Here's who allows you to do it. And here's what they look for you to do. The only thing we care about is paragraph number 3. The types and values of assets to be transferred must be clearly defined and typically require independent valuation to ensure accurate capital recognition and a robust risk transfer. So what does that mean to us? Well, think about it. They moved over $335 billion. That was actually correctly priced. And we know these are bad assets or they wouldn't be putting them into the bad bank, right? So that means that this $335 billion could represent what, people? 400, $500 billion worth of face value? More? We don't know. Were they down 50%, 60, 30? Who knows, right? They don't tell us. But let's put it this way. It's a lot more than $388 billion. So why does Deutsche Bank do this? Well, first is capital treatment. By transferring the assets to the bad bank, only assets moved into a legally distinct bad bank or sold outright qualify for full capital relief. In other words, if they move it over to the bad bank, then the bank doesn't have to keep capital against it. Risk-weighted assets impact. Now, we've talked about RWA so many times, okay? Basically, the SEC has said certain assets you have to hold more capital against. And so what they say is if you move it over to the bad bank, there are no RWAs. You just have the minimum capital requirements of Tier 1, CD, and overall Basel III. You don't have to do the RWAs because you put it over into the bad bank. So they get relieved a lot of capital that they can use to go spend, lend it to other people. And here again in the third paragraph, again, I encourage you to stop and read this. It's not that hard to understand. But the third one, the capital relief is realized through reduction in RWAs corresponding to the transferred asset. Released capital strengthens the bank's common equity and total capital ratios. So think about what they're saying here. You create a fake bank, okay? You still own 100% of it, but you don't have to put up the same capital requirements. You can take that extra capital and move it over into your quote unquote good bank and say, oh, look at us. We meet our capital requirements because this bad bank has much lower requirements over here. And yes, that's filled with $500 billion of whatever word you want to put in there, put it in. What are we going to do, right? So here again, they end this whole article by saying about the reduction in RWAs, which gives them capital relief and then makes them look like they're now making money. So now we're back to this, right? So they have $69 billion, okay, in capital, tangible capital. And we know they put whatever, 500, 600 billion. They're saying it's 335. Okay, let's go with 335. And but we know it's more face value because they had to have correct valuations to move them over there. So here's the deal. If that portfolio is down 5, 10, 15, $20 billion out of this 500 billion, okay, this company is bankrupt. So this is what we call financial engineering. This is like the hold to maturity portfolios, except they say you can create a bad bank. So did they really do a good strategy? What do you think?